right. Good afternoon, and welcome to the Education Transformation and Accountability Committee meeting. The purpose of this committee is to support and facilitate the successful implementation of the State Board and MSDE strategic plan, the blueprint for Maryland's future, and provide advice and recommendations on matters related to accountability standards and outcomes. Today, we have one item on our agenda, and it is the alignment of education plan metrics. As our public is aware, over the past 11 months, the Maryland State Board of Education and MSDE released their strategic plan. The Accountability and Implementation Board issued their Blueprint Comprehensive Implementation Plan, and then the Office of Governor Wes Moore released the Moore-Miller Administration State Plan. Each plan includes a list of education metrics for the state and school districts to track. Since February, MSDE and AIB staff have met weekly to identify proposed targets based on the identified alignment of education plan metrics so that districts are able to see the alignment between all three entities and are able to clearly work to meet the targets presented to them. Tonight, we will review the alignment of these measures in preparation for the presentation to the entire Board of Education during the May 21st Board of Education meeting. It brings me great pleasure to welcome our two presenters tonight, Dr. Sanderson and Rachel Heiss from AIB, and they are going to work together to do today's presentation. Just for our public, I know most people know who Rachel Heiss is, but Dr. Sanderson is the Deputy State Superintendent for Accountability. We welcome him to the MSDE team. And we are now ready for the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Golson, committee members, and Rachel Heiss for joining this evening. Just as a quick point of clarification, the presentation will be coming to you all, formal recommendations in the joint board meeting with AIB in June.
Thank you for that clarification.
Okay, Charlene, if you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. Dr. Golson gave a pretty much overview of everything that I have on this slide. So let me just kind of, as a recap, within the past year, there have been 3 state plans that have been released that target public education in the state of Maryland. Most recently, we had the Moore-Miller State Plan that was released this past February. Prior to that, we had the MSBE strategic plan that was released in June, followed by the AIB implementation plan. Within these, you'll see they have, each has a unique set of goals and indicators that they are attempting to address. I'm trying to minimize so I can see my entire screen. Thank you. Okay. And so you'll see the number of items that are shared within each plan. On the next slide, what this goes through is in February, board members received a presentation that was based on work with MSDE and with AIB on trying to identify where there is alignment across the plans and where there are particular goals or targets that are unique to one specific plan but may not be reflected in one or more of the other. And so what you'll see here in the listing is those that were identified as common metrics across at least multiple plans. Work we engaged in and we'll share with you all this evening is based on this identification. We started the process in February of going through and trying to establish combined targets that speak to each of these areas. And so we started and we mostly went sequential, and beginning with early childhood education. We'll share with you this evening where we are with that relative to the new assessment instrument that we are in the process of adopting. Also talked about literacy and college and career readiness, workforce diversity and retention, along with the career ladder that is being implemented, the attendance behavior and courses, followed by chronic absenteeism and student support personnel. And what I would invite now is I'm going to have Ms. Heiss go through, and each of these slides should be mostly familiar. They are following what was presented to board in February with the new addition in the last row on each of these, with where we came to consensus in our work meeting with AIB. And I should say, I believe I did, but we really have been meeting weekly. We've been good about having a fixed, dedicated time as we try to tackle this. And it's been kind of an evolving work as we go through one meeting in preparation for the next, and sometimes having to review and revisit some of these items. But I feel like we're at the point now to present to you all for review the work product thus far. Rachel?
Thank you, Jeff. So as Dr. Goldson and Dr. Sanderson have said, AIB and MSD have been working quite, spending a lot of quality time together, going through these metrics and trying to come to consensus around what a combined metric we would propose to the two boards as the metric to track for blueprint implementation progress in these areas. So the first area is early childhood education, which is pillar 1 of the blueprint for those thinking of it in that way. And in this case, the 3 different plans really had almost a very similar metric already identified. So not surprisingly, the proposed combined metric is the percent of kindergarten students demonstrating readiness on a kindergarten readiness assessment. And that would include both kindergarten students coming to public school who were served by either a public or a private pre-K provider. And so we'll continue through these, and then I'm going to cover the metrics that we're proposing, and then turn it back over to Jeff to talk about the proposed targets that we have come up with for each of these combined metrics. So for literacy, again, the metrics were pretty well aligned already. And so we're looking at the percent of 3rd graders who score at least proficient on the English language arts assessment. And of course, literacy is something that the MSD and AIB have been spending a lot of time on in the last couple of years. And so we have high hopes for literacy. The next area is college and career readiness. And that both literacy and college and career readiness fall under pillar 3 of the blueprint. And you can see that in this area, we had the MSDE plan and the governor's plan are basically identical. The blueprint comprehensive plan, or the AIB implementation plan, has 6 different metrics that the AIB is tracking around college and career readiness, or monitoring, I should say, around college and career readiness. And so the combined metric, we weren't able to cover it with just one. So we do have 3 proposed here. The percentage of 10th graders who meet the CCR standard, and then the percentage of all high school students who meet the standard before high school graduation. So sort of like the goal is that you're college and career ready by 10th grade, but no later than the end of high school. So we have a metric for each of those. And then the 3rd metric is around the post-CCR pathways for students who have become college and career ready. And so the 3 taken together, kind of the governor and the MSD plan kind of had 2 in 1 there. So we kind of broken them out. And then we also added the percent of 10th graders who meet the CCR standard. The next slides are around workforce diversity and retention. Again, the governor's plan and the MSDE plan are fairly similar. And the AIB plan was a little different. And again, this is pillar 2 of the blueprint, if you're thinking about it that way. And so we really, given the alignment of the 2 other plans, the consensus was to go with the percent of new teachers of color as measured by the MSD's fall staff collection report. I think that for the AIB's measure, it's almost more of a target, is because ultimately the goal of the blueprint is that the diversity of our teachers, it looks like the diversity of our students. And so it's less of a metric than maybe a future target. And then on workforce retention, again, very similar. The combined proposed metric is to look at the percent of all teachers and new teachers retained over a 3-year period. The AIB had been looking at a 5-year period rather than a 3-year period, but 3 years seemed like a reasonable period. And what do we have next? The career ladder. And so you can see there are a number of the AIB had proposed several different metrics to track as part of monitoring career ladder implementation. And we kind of combined them essentially. And basically we want to look at the percentage of teachers that are participating at each level on the career ladder. And there are a total of 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And level 4 is the teacher leadership track that the other MSDE and the governor's plans were focused on level 4. And we wanted to make sure that we're also including particularly level 3, which is where if teachers become national board certified, or if there's not an area in their subject, a national board certification area in their subject matter, then if they have a master's degree, then they come in at level 3. And then level 3 is kind of your pipeline for teachers to move up to level 4. So we wanted to make sure that we were monitoring all the levels of the career ladder. The next is chronic absenteeism. And again, the metrics were very similar. The governor's metric was looking at all children who are chronically absent. The AIB and MSD were also kind of looking at subsets of looking at different schools and cohorts of schools and looking at absentee rates. The combined metric is just the chronic absenteeism in all schools, but we will be able to disaggregate that by different types of schools. So if we want to dig deeper, look under the hood, we'll be able to do that. But in terms of trying to just come up with one simple kind of concise metric, it will just be the rate of chronic absenteeism in all schools. Next is student support personnel. Here we had probably more of a challenge because the metrics were very different. The AIB plan within Pillar 4 specifically has identified the counselor-student ratio in schools as a metric to track, and this is something that has been a metric that has been recommended to follow for a number of years. It was part of the discussion in the Kerwin Commission, and we'll get to the target later. But there is a national kind of proposed standard for what that ratio should be, and so that is the AIB's metric that we are currently monitoring. We did have a discussion with the governor's office to better understand their proposal, which is the percent of schools with 1 or more school psychologists, mental health professionals, etc. So we did have a conversation with them last week around trying to understand what they were trying to get at with this metric. And we do have a revised proposal on this metric. And so there would essentially be two metrics. The first would be the counselor student ratio. And when we get to when Jeff gets to the slides, we do have a target identified for that. And then the second metric, essentially we need to finalize the language, but essentially it would be looking at mental health professionals in schools, which would include a psychologist or a social worker. And so, Jeff, did you want to add anything?
No, I think that was well said. That covers exactly. I think, as Rachel indicated, we did have a conversation late last Friday afternoon, because with the Moore-Miller state plan, trying to understand, because it was vague on two fronts between the definition of a mental health professional, which roles were identified for that, and then also if there was interest in trying to capture different additional roles because of the et cetera that was included in that. And so we staffed with the governor's team, kind of walked through where their interests were. I think we're in a much better place. It's going to require some additional modeling of the data, because the way we had been preparing the data and the way we have been trying to identify a metric turned out to not be consistent with what the interest of the Moore-Miller state plan was. And so I think we're in much better shape now with where the intent is and what we need to be able to provide in order to better inform this measure. Charlene, if you want to go on to the next one. So I think we have 3 remaining slides, and so I'm going to try to step you all through what our process was for aligning targets to these metrics that we've been able to identify. And we did have a fair amount of, I think, agreement in landing on the measures that would inform all 3 existing education plans that we have. And so we were trying to forecast for 3 years in each measure, so that our interim targets spanned out to the 2025-2026 school year, end of that school year. And so we conceivably can have a year 1 target this school year, year 2 next, and then year 3 for being able to monitor as we move forward. To the extent possible, we used all the data we had. We actually had an arsenal of lots of data. In some cases, we were collecting 10 years worth and trying to package it together for linear trends and being able to determine what made the most sense. We also had to do some adjustments for obvious reasons with pandemic closure and the impact that had on student learning. And so in some cases, I'll talk with you about where we weren't able to follow a trend, or the trend itself is not a positive trend. And so it would be counterproductive to try to carry that forward and establish targets that would suggest negative improvement or negative growth. And so in those cases, we also did we did a variety of things depending on what we thought was going to be most appropriate. In some instances, we did use the highest 1-year growth, if we could see that, depending on the trending that was indicated. And then what I will share with you shortly is in some of the measures, we are still awaiting baseline, because it's going to involve new data collection. And so we weren't able to provide at this time targets for some of them. And so if we go to the next slide, what I will step you through for this slide and the next, so I can see it. It's kind of going in order based on what was just shared with you all. For the early childhood measure, there was agreement across all 3 plans to be able to measure that based on the percent of kindergartners demonstrating readiness on the kindergarten readiness assessment. As you all know, we're in the process of a request for proposal for a new assessment instrument to be able to inform these efforts. And so at this time, we're proposing to wait until we at least have baseline data with the new instrument once it's adopted to be able to determine what would be appropriate on future target setting. For literacy, this one was pretty straightforward, establishing a 3-year target. And what you'll see in most of these where we've indicated in parentheses what that might look like to achieve that target. The intent here is understanding that LEAs are at different places currently in their student achievement. And so while at the state level, we are going to be presenting to you all recommendations around some actual fixed specific numeric values, we also wanted to be able to provide a mechanism for LEAs to be able to establish their own targets. So as an example, if I'm an LEA and my current grade 3 reading proficiency rate is at 70%, they obviously would not be attempting to establish a target that is at 60% 3 years from now. But they do have the opportunity in understanding how we arrived at the 60% target if they wanted to scale up. And in the example I was just sharing, then they could establish a grade 3 reading proficient target of 84. As 82% in that example, if they wanted to. And so where we are currently by default would be based on spring 2023 grade 3 reading proficiency, that rate was at 48%. And so we wanted to at least make sure we had some ambitiousness to our targets. And so the 4 percentage point growth annually, it is, I would say, aggressive. And that was part of our thinking based on some of the current initiatives that we already have in place and have started laying the foundation based on improvements in the area of reading, specifically for grade 3. For college career readiness, this is one where it's new data collection. And so we need to be able to better inform this metric. We're going to have to wait for at least getting baseline results so that we can start establishing what that's going to look like moving forward and what makes most sense. For workforce diversity and workforce retention, these kind of spill a little bit. This might not be the best way for us to capture. I might combine them going forward, but we were trying to identify for workforce diversity, the interest is being able to diversify based on new teachers of color, but also being able to in the entire workforce of teachers of color. And so the 2 measures that we've established here, proposed target, is for the first 1% of new teachers of color to achieve 52% by school year 2026, which would represent approximately a 3 percentage point increase annually. And then also the percent of teachers of color retained over a 3-year period, target set there at 75%, which is a 5 percentage point increase over 3 years. For the second measure here, part of the challenge is it's effectively a cohort measure because we are tracking a teacher, but we're tracking a teacher over a 3-year period. And so it's going to be one of those that's a little more difficult because it does not receive an annual update based on the methodology that we're using. For workforce retention, similarly looking at our percent of teachers in the workforce that are retained over a 3-year period. And so if I'm a teacher this current school year, am I also a teacher next school year and then also in the 25-26 school year? And that's the case, then I would be counted positive in this calculation. And so the target that we've adopted or proposed for this measure is percent of teachers retained over a 3-year period to be at 78% in 3 years, which represents approximately a 4.3 percentage point increase annually. And then the second target we established is for the percent of new teachers to be retained over a 3-year period, and for that rate to be at 68.5%, which represents similarly a 5 percentage point increase over 3 years. For the remaining goals for career ladder, this one, because of the nature of it being a new data collection for us, we are waiting so that we can establish baseline data for it. For chronic absenteeism, where we looked at for this one is to have a rate in 3 years of 19.5%, which represents a 10 percentage point decrease over 3 years. That's a pretty aggressive target, but part of the thinking there also was that the 19.5% represents pre-pandemic rate for the state of Maryland. And so we had a significant increase in the chronic absenteeism when we came back from COVID. And so where we were trying to forecast there was at least to return to pre-pandemic levels. And then from there, once we've achieved that target, then to be able to continue to decrease the overall rate of absenteeism for our students. For student support personnel, Rachel served this up very well because this was a pretty big challenge. Let me kind of step you through where we hit some roadblocks and needed some clarification, and where I think we are in much better shape to be able to bring to you all recommendations. So the first part of this, as Rachel indicated, was to achieve reduce the student counselor ratio so that there are more counselors that are able to work with our kids. The current rate is 307 students for every 1 counselor. What we are proposing for our 3-year target is to reduce that rate to 290 students for every 1 counselor. And also, as Rachel had indicated, the national standards would suggest that 250 students to every 1 counselor is optimal. I'm not sure I've found a system that has achieved that ratio just yet, because it would involve it's a challenge. It's the gold standard and one we definitely would work towards. But at this time, we felt like even trying to reduce to a ratio of 290 students per 1 counselor was ambitious. And it's clear in the trend data that we are working towards a lower threshold already. I think in response to the pandemic closures, there has been more attention and more resources allocated to being able to provide social emotional supports for students in schools through a variety of personnel. The second part of this measure, where we had to go back to the governor's team and get some clarification, is on the definition of school mental health professionals, and also the interest of percent by school. Because the way we aggregate data now, the way we have aggregated it, is to take, in the instance of student counselor ratio as an example, we would effectively take all students based on enrollment counts across the state, which nets nearly 900,000 students in our case. And then we would divide that based on the total number of counselors based on roll ID as reported in fall staff collection. When we tried to expand that methodology to the second part of this equation with mental health professionals, it did not address specifically school coverage. So even though we might be able to indicate that we have all these professionals, we're still trying to work through, does that mean there's at least 1 professional at each school location? And so we have some limitations in our data now, but we have, based on the collection, we can get fairly accurate numbers in this form. One of the challenges we initially had share with you is we had to define the student support personnel measure. We originally were including counselors along with psychologists, student personnel workers, school social workers, and then nurse, hygienist, or other health professional. And so when we had further discussions with the governor's team and what the interest was, they really were trying to target the psychologist as a unique role supporting schools along with the school social worker. And so what we're going to propose for consideration is two measures, because if we use counselor in that equation, so as an example, if we try to say how many of our schools, what percent of our schools have at least a counselor, a psychologist, or a school social worker, we're going to have a very high rate because of the nature of at least counselors in particular, even though the first part of our measure is targeting the student to counselor ratio. We have widespread coverage of that profession in our schools. And so the second measure we're going to propose is looking at what percent of schools have at least a psychologist or a school social worker. And we'll be able to provide those rates. The one limitation, or one of the limitations that I had mentioned, is in our current data collection, we attribute staff to one or two locations. That's part of how data is collected when they were reporting. And so, as an example, if I'm a split funded person or a split itinerant type staff, and I cover, say, one campus for a part of my week and then a different campus for different schools for the second part of my week, we capture that. But if I am an individual and psychologist, to be honest, I was one way back in the day, is one of those professions that it's not uncommon for it to be itinerant because of the nature of their work in diagnostics and being able to provide evaluations to students. And so they might actually work on 5 different campuses. They might have a cluster of schools that they've been assigned that they have to be able to provide supports for. And so we're going to be a little bit limited in whether or not it truly reflects, am I on Monday at school A, Tuesday at school B, so forth. But I do think we'll be able to provide some good data that will be actionable. And then the final piece here, before I open it up to you all for questions, is after we've gone through this body of work, we've spent, as Rachel indicated, better part of 2+ months on weekly conversations and trying to go through and bring data to the table for our teams to review and to have discussions around. As the work progressed and we started getting towards or closer to a finished product, we realized we did not have anything that was specific to mathematics or specific to a grade level mathematics target. And so what we are proposing here, based on and understanding that mathematics nationally took a much more significant hit in performance and was impacted more negatively than reading or literacy was for our students, particularly at the primary grades in elementary schools. And so what we've looked at here is looking at our mathematics target to be at grade 5. And our thought process there was we are proposing a literacy target that's informed by grade 3 English language arts, looking at grade 5 as that final transition grade in most school systems and schools before students move to middle school. That this would give us an opportunity to now have some good targets around evaluating system progress, not only in literacy, but also in mathematics and elementary grades prior to middle school enrollment. It also gives us an opportunity for future considerations around target setting that would involve secondary level mathematics, and having those discussions as well. And so currently for our mathematics performance based on spring 2023 MCAP results in math, we had a rate of 27% proficient, or 27% of students achieving a level 3 or level 4 on the assessment. And what we're proposing here is we felt like that it needs to be a bit more aggressive, even with an aggressive reading target, because of the gaps that we see in reading performance compared to mathematics performance. And so the target established for this one for consideration is 42% as our 3-year or our interim target. And with that, that is kind of a run through of what we have prepared for you all, and we will open it up for questions that you might have.
Thank you. I normally go to our committee members and then I go last, but I am going to ask the committee if they will allow me to go first today. Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. So I had a couple of comments and questions. The first one was thank you for the slide around the student support and acknowledging that we really do need to tease out the definition of school counselor or the data will be skewed. So by adding in a school psychologist and a social worker, we have only a subset of students who access the services from those two types of positions. And so it would be incumbent upon us to really just focus on professional school counselors. And then, I mean, I know we got to work with the governor's office to define those roles, but if we could some kind of way disaggregate that, that would help. And then I just want to, and you already said it, that was an ambitious goal of the 290 to 1. While it is definitely where we would like to be, it's ambitious. And typically professional school counselors come from classroom teaching positions that have gone back and gotten additional certification. So now here we are pulling from the classroom to support. It just is, we've got to monitor it. But I definitely understand our need, and then wondering if there's an opportunity to combine the mental health professionals or counselors with the professional school counselors when you go back to the table to have that discussion. And then for the metrics, can you go back to the slide before the last one for the combined metrics? And I just wanted to highlight a key point, if we can pull that one back up. Who has control of the PowerPoint? Is that
Really, Charlene.
oh, Charlene?
Charlene does.
Disregard. Don't worry about it. You highlighted it in the presentation where it looks like, I'm gonna refer to where it looks like we added mathematics to the combined areas. Keep going. It's at the very, yep, there we go. That one, yes, 13. Sorry, I couldn't, couldn't see the numbers on the page. So when you look at the early childhood targets and we look at literacy, if one were to just look at the combined metrics, it would make people believe that we only care about literacy at grade 3 and numeracy at grade 5. And the numeracy I'm referring to is in mathematics on the second page. And of course, I probably could argue around college and career readiness that because I know that there's certain criteria in order to be CCR ready, we've added in a mathematics component. But we know that that's not true. And so we know that's not true because when you come back to slide, like the first slide, maybe 2 or 3, where it lists all of the, there we go, slide 2, where it lists all of the metrics. There were 11 from Moore Miller, 18 from MSDE, and then 60 from AIB. Obviously, we're missing a lot of metrics in between. So what message does that send to school districts that it appears that we only care about grade 3 literacy, grade 5 numeracy, and maybe, and we do at the CCR level care about a grade 9 and 10 numeracy and literacy. So I just want us to be cautious of, I know we want to show an alignment, but what does that mean for the other grade levels that are identified there? Okay, those are my notes before I pass them on to someone else.
Would it be okay if I just respond a little bit to that?
Yep,
So I
please.
think that's a really fair point, and we do need to think about sort of the messaging as well as just sort of, I think we're very laser focused on just aligning metrics and proposing targets for you. But in this first round of the work, we really focused on what the most immediate metrics and targets that we wanted to identify that will signal that we are sort of like what I call the sort of the early shoots, like so that we know that we're starting to make progress in blueprint implementation. And so that is why for literacy and math, we focused on elementary in this first round, but you're absolutely right. That's not the end of it. And so in the AIB, and you're also very right to point out, obviously 60 in metrics is a lot to be monitoring. So we don't necessarily want to suggest that we need 60, but I think AIB's, the metric that we have around all of the subjects is that we would monitor progress at the appropriate like grades and transition points. So to be determined what those are for literacy and math, and actually science when practicable is also part of the blueprint. So definitely don't want to send the message that other grades and subjects aren't important. But we did just focus on aligning the metrics and coming up with proposed targets for sort of the leading indicators of blueprint progress.
So then we just need to include that on the front end and save that that's key, because then that would have set the map for why. And then that only now brings me to this question: then why grade 5 for numeracy?
Right, and I'll speak to that one. On the earlier topic, just as a point of information, when you're mentioning student support personnel, for each of those roles that I mentioned, we capture them as a unique role, and so we have lots of options on board interest in aggregating any of those data. So if we want to introduce different roles into a combined measure, we certainly can do that. If we want to see them, our starting place was looking at, I truly can share with you all how many, based on each of those roles, we have those counts statewide by LEA, by school, with the limitations I mentioned earlier on school location. So we have lots of flexibility on trying to address that. For the mathematics, part of our conversation to kind of bring you into our thought process was trying to not have targets, measures and targets at each grade level, and disaggregating it down to such a level where we have to adopt some sort of rubric to gauge success. So as an example, if we had 100 different indicators that we're monitoring, and we achieve, say, 50 of them in a given year, is that a successful year? It's those types of conversations that we had, and really what we were trying to maybe capture in this first iteration was more of what I would refer to as power indicators, or maybe some of those high yield points in transition for students that would give us some reasonable indication of system progress and statewide progress in schools, but then also have the ability to provide analyses around supporting indicators, to your point, looking at. So as an example, if we focused on kindergarten readiness with reading, and then we check back in at grade 3, we have the opportunity to see first grade data and second grade data. And some of that will be uniform across the state. Some of that is going to be dependent upon LEA assessment practices where we don't have a state mandated assessment. And so we have some opportunities to be creative in the form of the work, and certainly can bring additional measures to the table.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Josh Michaels, Dr. Michaels, I see your hand is raised.
Just wanted to follow up on your question on why 5th grade. It is one of the key early warning system data points that we established in our strategic plan. It is the math indicator we placed in our strategic plan and Enabler 2. The reason that we added that in, one of the primary reasons, is how the standard structure, right, in the math standards is the culminating point of really the basic elementary work around numbers and operations and fractions before it moves much heavier in the standards to focus on ratios and proportions and algebraic reasoning. and much more application of numbers and operations. So it's a key. The discussion at that point was that similar, maybe not the same, but similar to third grade literacy is a key point in time before you kind of undertake a new set of standards at which a significant amount of intervention is needed if you're not mastering standards at the end of fifth grade.
So, thank you for that, Josh. So we need to make sure either there's a note at the bottom of the slide that references back to the strategic plan, something, because
yeah, I think that's great.
Yeah.
I did want to, I think we should too. I think I would like to see for this document, us even include a math page in the first set of slides, even if we don't have even if it's just putting enabler 2 from our strategic plan. I think it belongs there because you might miss it. The second thing I would say, and I know we've got to balance the right indicators and this and that. I think that when we step back, the public is going to be looking, the first data point we're going to be looking at is proficiency levels in 3rd through 8th grade in literacy and in math. And I do believe that we need to be tracking those on here. I think we can hold on high school because they're lumped up in the college and career ready standards. But that is the number that the public is going to be looking to see how our public school system is doing as a whole, number one. And then number two, are we making progress on with the blueprint? And so I'd encourage us to, in the literacy and math, maintain this top line key indicator in 3rd and 5th. These are those leading indicators that'll tell us if we're making progress. But we have to, in this document, in my opinion, maintain 3rd through 8th in literacy and in math.
So just to clarify, and I totally agree that we can add a math slide and there is something in the blueprint comprehensive plan that we can also include. But you're saying in addition to the target for 3rd grade literacy and 5th grade math that you would also want 3rd through 8th grade proficiency in literacy and math as part of the, would those be areas now where we would be setting targets
Yes.
for 3rd through 8th grade in reading and math?
Yeah. And
As a combined measure, correct?
correct. Not for
As a
every little
combined-
grade, but
Oh,
as a combined.
Oh, okay. Thank you
yeah,
for that
yeah,
clarification.
individual too, and I was going to, okay.
No, I mean, that's the top line number people are going to look at. And so we need to be, and the other piece that does, every school, every educator, every school leader needs to see themselves in these data points. And this will help ensure that there's an academic metric that every educator, educators at every school level can see themselves in.
Well, then that resolves the previous conversation around just picking grade levels to serve as like the indicators, the gate indicators. And I think that's not what they were trying to do. They weren't trying to have 50,000 measures.
I have another, but I can wait until I can put that after other people have spoken.
Can I just clarify? So what I hear Dr. Goldson suggesting, and obviously we're going to be presenting this to the outcome measures work group as well and getting their feedback and then taking all the feedback and then taking another stab at this before June, the June joint board meeting. Are you suggesting that we not have the target for 3rd grade literacy and 5th grade math and only have this grade 3 to 8 proficiency?
You said in addition to.
Okay, that's what I thought. In addition to, okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah.
And I think the power in this is it helps us focus systems on these two key, and that's aligned to the core part of the blueprint on this notion of early warning systems the alignment of intervention, additional resources throughout the blueprint, while we're not losing focus on achievement across the board.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments, questions, thoughts? All right. Josh, that means it's coming back to you, sir.
I want to go back to literacy. Got to tell you, with the amount that we're focusing on literacy right now, not all. To me, and I believe that standard should be at 5 points a year, at 15 total. When you look at the states that have done the type of work that we're taking on, they have made 5 percentage points a year. And, you know, we are familiar. We've looked at the Mississippi data. When you look at the work from 16 to 19, that is exactly what they did. On average, it was, you know, 5.2 percentage points gain in proficiency. Now, that number started a little bit lower than where we're starting. I am always much more comfortable setting an ambitious target, and maybe falling a little bit short than setting the bar too low. And, you know, so we meet the target. I think we send a strong message that this is our, you know, our top line priority, and we ought to be at 5 percentage points a year.
All right. No more for the good of the cause. All right, so I do want to just reiterate that this will be brought back to the board in June. Thank you for correcting me, not in May, which provides us time to provide feedback, AIB to provide feedback, for them to go back to the teams that help to align, and then we will, during the joint meeting, review in June what the metrics will look like based on the feedback we've given and the comments made. Perfect. All right, so that concludes, it's a miracle, we finished on time once again. That concludes the Education Transformation Committee meeting. Thank you for attending today's meeting. The next meeting will be June 13th at 6 p.m. A written description about the committee and future committee meeting dates can be found on the State Board of Education's website under the Committees and Task Force section. Thank you all for your feedback. Thank you to Ms. Heiss and Dr. Sanderson for your presentation this evening and for the time spent to take all those metrics from February and combine them to the ones that we will review again in June. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a great night.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.